Welcome everyone to today's talk show, Navigating the Higher Education. I'm delighted to have an exceptional guest with us today, who's Dr. Conor Walsh. He's the program leader for global environment change at the University of Greenwich. We'll be diving into some fascinating topics around environmental change, education, and career paths. Dr. Welsh, it's an honor to have you. Thank you for joining us today.
Well, thank you very much for the invitation. It's lovely to be here.
So let's get started to get to really know a bit about you. Can you share with us your personal journey and what led you to pursue a career in, let's say, environmental or global environmental change? And what were some of the key motivations that really shaped your path?
Sure. Well, first of all, I'm very, very lucky in that my job title as an environmental scientist is actually what I did my degree in. It doesn't necessarily always work out like that for everyone. So I feel very privileged to be able to call myself what I originally studied. So I'm from rural Ireland, which is very, very green. And on the surface, that might seem really idyllic, but when I was a younger person and I did science in secondary school, we learned a little bit about how things that might look very, very natural can still have lots of problems and challenges. And it helped me understand the beautiful rural place that I lived actually had a lot of difficulties from an environmental perspective, particularly due to things like a large amount of livestock production. And that really sparked my interest in doing an environmental science degree, which I did in the local university. And that was a really exceptional opportunity to try to place your local experience within a wider global context. And I started off doing things like chemistry, a lot of lab work, which wasn't really my strong suit. So I got into looking at trying to understand the flows of material around our environment and our economy in the same way that accountants try to track the flow of money from different parts. You've probably heard of credit and debit sheets or balance sheets. Um, and I had the opportunity to focus on that for my research project at the end of my um, uh, degree, and I followed that up with a PhD expanding the same topic. So I started off focusing on a very small little bit, and I got more in depth looking at how we can try to measure our demand on the environment and the types of benefits we get from that. And that has helped us, or at least, sorry, helped me get an appreciation for the many different services and the many different demands that we place in our environment. Um, and that has given me an opportunity to work in areas from belching cows to designing ship engines. So I would consider myself a cautionary tale on interdisciplinarity. You name it, the chance I've either worked with or with someone who's done it.
That's really insightful. I can see how these experiences must have shaped your approach. It's always really inspiring to hear about these type of journeys, but I'd love to dive deeper. What inspired you to really focus on this particular program at the University of Greenwich? And if you had to reflect on it, what would be, let's say, have been the most rewarding part of your career so far?
Okay. Well, as I said, I'm, if you excuse the most overused phrase, a jack of all trades. I've worked in a range of different fields. I would consider myself an interdisciplinary scientist. Now, that's different from multidisciplinary, and it's a slight subtle difference. A person that tries to be interdisciplinary tries to see how one set of skills in one area can have relevance or can be applied or integrated with those of another. So it's not just I can do lots of different things. It's more of a case of I can try to do something in a different context that adds value.
Mhm.
And so this program is designed as a successor to a previous program that was offered in this university. And that previous program was based around environmental management and was focusing on a lot of national or local level considerations of like things like managing wastewater or managing developing an environmental management plan for a region or a installation, and that's very important. But one thing that was missing from that was the wider global context to help understand what the smaller scale things are trying to contend with, but also a range of skills involving both quantitative, bean counting, but also understanding the value and the more socially driven aspects that help try to change behavior, or help people understand why we're facing this collective challenge that we are. So this program tries to get people to take the perspective of both the, again, if you pardon me, afraid, the bean counter, the accountant, the person that measures things and tries to quantify things, but also the person that tries to change behavior or tries to understand why individuals might do might make a certain resource choice, and how we can motivate changes that are beneficial to everyone.
Inspiring. So speaking of that, uh, I can imagine that you're working on some fascinating projects at the moment, I would presume. Are there any current or future projects you're particularly excited about, or collaborations that
Oh.
are worth highlighting?
So currently, I am involved in a project with a cooperative in Guatemala that involves hundreds of different farmers, usually small scale farmers, that are trying to supplement their income by growing two very important commodities: coffee, which everyone I'm sure is aware of, but also cardamom, which is a very high value spice. If you've ever had masala chai, or if you like a nice curry, the chance you've probably encountered this.
Even
And those
spices
are
as well.
nice.
Yeah.
And both of those, in order to get your cup of coffee or your matcha chai, a lot of individual actors have to work together to
Mhm.
get you your final products. And that involves a lot of processing from not just the growers, but also transporters and people that take the raw material and then convert it into something more usable.
Mhm.
Um, and it is also something that involves a lot of energy use for things like drying. And so we're involved in a project involving a lot of farmers in this cooperative to try to find ways of replacing some of the energy that's used at the processing step, which is often around, let's say, natural gas, which is a fossil fuel, something we want to try to cut down, but also trying to find ways to replace that with wood fuel without succumbing to the pressure to deforest, because that's really important. The removal of, even though I'm generally supportive of bioenergy, I think we have to be very cautious about where that bioenergy comes from.
Mhm.
So we're trying to find ways to try to reduce the fossil fuel energy demand by obtaining new sources of fuel through things like tree pruning, use of dead trees, or use of sustainably managed forestry systems that don't extend the pressure onto the primary or the natural rainforests that are within the proximity of these plantations. So that's one project that I'm working with, and I have to say I'm very, very encouraged by the support of the farmers as part of a cooperative. These folks are really conscious of the benefits of trying to and aware of the challenges of trying to um, reduce the impact of their activities, whilst also ensuring they have a livelihood. And this is a really difficult challenge we're facing. We have to make sure that the folks that we try to propose an alternative to actually also make sure that they have adequate support to ensure they can make a living for themselves and their families. And that's a real difficult balance that we're seeing right across the world. Um, Another project, very, very different, as I said, jack of all trades, another project I'm involved in is much more closer to home, and it's much more focused on a particular type of technology. So you've probably heard, or you're probably aware of the benefits of trying to transition from fossil fuels to a more renewable energy source. Yep, that
Yeah.
sounds great. But that often comes with its own challenges. One of the benefits of fossil fuel is that you can turn it on or turn it off, if you pardon the expression, as you need it.
Yes.
Whereas if we're reliant on something like wind power, we are dependent on when the wind blows. And very often the point at which we have most wind power is when we don't have the highest demand.
Mhm.
Something similar or analogous is seen for hydropower. So hydropower is based on water flowing downhill, hitting a turbine, spinning. That's fine. But we want to try to find a way to try to somehow bridge the gap between when wind turbines spin and when people need most of their energy to make their coffee. And one of the ways of doing that is using hydroelectric power as a storage medium, or
Oh.
not so much as medium, but a storage process.
Mhm.
So what we're hoping to do is look at pumped storage, which is basically a situation where you use energy to pump water uphill, and it's waiting there. And when you need it,
It goes down.
downhill. But of course, you've got the penalty of the loss of energy when you have to pump it uphill initially,
Sure.
and the fact that lots of places aren't suitable for the a hydroelectric plant. So how do we solve this? Well, one of the solutions is instead of pumping water, you pump something that is denser, which means you don't have to pump it quite as far, which means you can install these storage plants in different places. You're not quite as restricted as to where you build them. So I'm currently involved in a project that's trying to look at this high density pumped storage design to say, okay, if we have a system that's going to take energy from wind turbines, use it to pump a dense liquid, which is really a mix of water and finely suspended clay particles, up a hill, and then let it flow down again. That
Mhm.
way, the cost of pumping the water uphill, the
Process.
environmental cost,
Mhm.
isn't too much because ideally you're using wind energy when it
Mhm.
is available. And now you have this dense liquid sitting on top of a hill, waiting for you to be able to let it flow down and hit those turbines when you need it. So I'm looking at trying to look at the economic and the environmental trade-offs associated with this very specific technology. So again, very, very different. But these are examples of the types of principles and challenges that we talk about and deal with in our program.
That's amazing. That really sounds amazing. Fantastic. How do you see these projects really impacting the field of whatever field they're in, or the communities involved, either nationally or globally?
Okay, that's a really good question because there's no point in working on projects that are don't provide some tangible steer or outcome. So I'll go through these individually. The first project, well, the main benefit could be a framework for plantation or cooperative owners to try to find a way to maximize the available bioresources on their farm in such a way that they can supplement or replace the fossil energy further down along the supply chain. Because so what we see is that you have a system like growing coffee or cardamom, and you've got trees and they're growing and they're locking away a lot of carbon, and that's great. Um, and what the coffee companies are interested in is, well, okay, does the amount of carbon that's accumulated in this system compensate for the amount of carbon that's released later on as you go from coffee bean, coffee cup?
Mhm.
And a large uh, aspect of this is how much energy you need for things like drying or roasting. So if we can find ways for coffee growers to try to take these resources like pruning or reduce the impact of storing lots of coffee pulp such that it produces greenhouse gases anaerobically, like happened in the landfill. If we can reduce those impacts or find additional resources, it helps make the entire supply chain more sustainable. So you can help reduce, by finding better and alternative management systems on the farm, you could help compensate for some of the negative impacts elsewhere. And again, ensure you maintain an income, ensure you're able to continue on producing materials that both the consumer needs and providing incomes for your family. The second example is very important because a lot of the very large scale studies that look at the world and talk about how the energy system has to change, often they struggle with things like energy storage. So they will say, okay, by 2070, in order to reach a defined temperature anomaly target, i.e., we want to reduce or we want to ensure that global warming does not exceed a certain temperature above pre-industrial levels, whether it's 1.5 or 2 or hopefully we can keep things below 4, but whatever value that is, will be underpinned by different projections about what the energy system needs to do. So in order to meet a 2 degrees target, the world needs to decarbonize by a certain date, which will involve a lot more renewable energy. But how does that renewable energy actually become feasible? There's no point saying every country should transition to wind energy if we still have the same problem about load balancing and the wind blowing at 2 in the morning, but you being fast asleep. Whereas these innovative storage options like high density storage, which if it works as we are hoping it will, would give planners and energy system managers a greater opportunity to embed energy storage into a country's energy system. And that makes things like investment in wind more attractive.
Sounds very fascinating. I hope it can work out in the long term and other global and countries will be able to benefit from those projects. They're amazing. Now let's take a step back and really introduce the focus of your work to our audience. Could you explain the basics of the Global Environmental Change Program at the University of Greenwich and why the universities, not just Greenwich, other universities also are increasingly offering such programs that are related to environment, either being global or other such? So it'd be great to know.
Sure. And again, that's a really good question. So, as I said, one of the things I feel very strongly about is that equipping people to try to play a very fundamental role in trying to solve these wide shared challenges. We need people that are conversational in a lot of different areas and that have a diverse set of skills. We don't just need people who are engineers, but we need people who can act as intermediaries between engineers and other stakeholders. So the program I'm leading is very interdisciplinary. At its heart, yes, it does have an environmental science focus, but that is balanced by modules that look at how organizations, large organizations, corporate responsibility, ESG, undertake initiatives to try to moderate their own behavior, as well as trying to talk about climate adaptation as a balance to climate mitigation, and trying to look at both wider global trends in climate and environmental resource use and how that can relate to more small scale elements in terms of both ecosystem services, conservation, soil health. So we have these two sort of foundational ideas that underpin our design of the program in terms of the modules that we present, in terms of the types of projects we encourage students to look at. And that is that they need to be interdisciplinary and have a sufficient understanding of the perspectives of multiple practitioners, but also try to appreciate what's happening at the large scale as a way of understanding what that means from the small scale. One of the things I feel very strongly about it is given the scale, sorry, I'm only using the word scale, I apologize, given the extent of the challenge and its urgency, we need folks that are going to be, entering the workforce now and imminently are going to be tasked with both making a choice themselves in terms of what different, let's say, policymakers are proposing, but also trying to act as interpreters for what this means for everyone else. So that involves having the capacity to speak to ordinary people about this challenge, but also, as we said, act as intermediaries between folks that are maybe based within the social sphere or those that are more technical. And so this program requires students to try to engage in aspects of all of those to allow them to become a jack of all trades themselves. And again, that is used in some cases as pejoratively. I don't. I think the ability to be interdisciplinary and be comfortable about talking about different views, different perspectives, and different skill sets, and the ability to use different tools is crucial in helping not just individual economies address this shared challenge, but also act as ambassadors for why this problem is so important and what we need to do about it.
That really gives us a really amazing, good foundation to really understand the program and its use. But with many fields, as we all know, there can be misconceptions by many, whoever they are. What are some of the common misunderstandings about environmental programs, either being your program, Global Environmental Change, or any other environmental
So,
program? And what advice would you give to students considering this program as they can make informed decisions, let's say on.
okay. Whoa, that's a tough one. I think for me there are two really important misconceptions. Well, let's say challenging perspectives. Um, as someone I'm not a climate scientist, but I've worked with climate scientists. I've used the outputs of climate science. So as being an interdisciplinary scientist, I'm able to work with climate sciences and help understand their objective and how that applies to my work. So one of the things that I often try to explain to people when they see government policies about, okay, well, what should the government do, and what impact will that have on what I'm experiencing at the moment? So we are currently in Kent, in the southeast of England, and this summer has been not. It hasn't been one of the most memorable. It's been slightly chilly by other comparisons. In previous years, we've had very significant droughts. A couple of years ago, we reached 40 degrees centigrade for the first time. And this comes down to the difference between climate and weather, and trying to explain to people that what you're feeling right now is really a very poor indication of where we are headed collectively as a global community. And equally, that's the extent to which any one country is going to experience these sorts of threats or difficulties really depends on what we together as a global community, because climate change is a global problem. You could have one country that decides to decarbonize, and if others do not, then that does not mean it's not going to face the brunt of changes in our weather system. Also, I try to help people understand that there's a big difference between the impact of what happens in a particular country versus the impact of the activities within that country. Now, what I mean by that is you can look at the UK's carbon emissions over many decades, and they have increased, which is fantastic. And part of that is due to changes in the structure of the industry and the extent of industrialization. But
Mhm.
that doesn't necessarily mean that people themselves are becoming a lot more resource efficient. If you look at, if I lift up my laptop, there's a very good chance it'll say made in China. So that means that the emissions associated with this laptop, even though they happened in part due to the production of steel in a particular country, it's my consumptive behavior that's really driving those emissions for this particular activity. So we try to get people to think about, okay, it's not just the amount of gas that is burned in a particular country or the amount of oil, but it's also the embodied impact of your wider consumption and what that and what that um, how that affects the wider activities of other economies that you're connected to. So that's one point. In relation to that, I think, and this is unfortunately, this is there's no there's no really easy way around this. One point I try to get folks to think about is not to become overly fixated with efficiency gain, which are really important. If you have a factory that's producing a particular product and its impact per product is reduced, that's great. But if you're making twice as many doohickeys, to use a technical term, the overall impact might not have been reduced, might well increase. Our climate, our global system, our life support has upper limits, finite upper limits. We have a global carbon budget. That means that in order to increase the likelihood of limiting global warming to a defined amount above pre-industrial levels, that provides a absolute global upper limit on the amount that we can emit. Kind of related to my other points. If we all become a lot more efficient in doing X, Y, Z, but the overall demand for resources increases, we're still going to find ourselves in a lot of trouble. Now, and again, that ties into a lot of very, very difficult conversations about, well, okay, you know, what if we are, what does that mean for an individual in terms of their behavior, in terms of their resource demands? And unfortunately, there are very few easy answers to this. And I guess as well, I suppose a final misconception is that that we're it's doomed. It's too late. We can't do no. I'm definitely one of the folks that tends to err on the side of seriousness, and I don't underplay the the seriousness of this problem. It is profoundly worrying, but the problem is not so much. It isn't as much one of it doesn't have as big a question mark over it because we know what we need to do. This is less a problem of technology. This is not a Manhattan project. This is not, we're not trying to discover something fundamental in solving this.
Yeah.
If we absolutely had to, we know what we need to do already. It is physically possible. It's just a matter of trying to do that in such a way that maintains livelihoods and tries to maintain standards of living. The difficulty is trying to find ways around it that ensure or doesn't result in significant reduction in people's quality of life. And that is a challenging bit because we're as our demand grows, the amount of impact of what we supply has to decrease. The extent to which we can become more efficient per unit that we supply is limited. And so our demand for resources has to reduce to compensate. And that is something that we, both individually and collectively, are struggling with.
I agree, I agree. And in back of my head, when you were saying, I believe there's another misconception, especially among the young generation. When
Yeah.
they see the word environment, they tend to think that I'll be studying about the weather,
Yes,
studying about when does it rain
absolutely.
and what's the clouds going on. but it actually, in all essence, it's larger than this. It's a whole program of other factors that impacts a global scale that we all need to, as individuals, as a nation, as governments, need to really take into consideration. This is a very vital program that is essential for every young generation for the future.
Well, this is why I think it's really important to have individuals that can act as, I suppose, commentators, irrespective of from a professional context, but purely from civic engagement and civic knowledge transfer. Having graduates from environment programs that can act as someone who can speak on behalf of um, their or their background, because we're going to see increasingly, um, both in news, media, as well as within the political realm, different perspectives as to whether how much trouble we're in, what we should do to try to get ourselves out, and whose responsibility is it to do most of the heavy lifting.
Sure,
Um, and we're going to be asked as electorates to decide on which of these alternative policies we prefer. And trying to address this will always come with challenges and trade-offs, very, very real ones. And these, I think, are not perhaps as recognized as clearly as they could be. So, irrespective of what program you come from, having a environmental graduate that is conversational in both technical and social perspectives is really valuable to act as a interpreter for society in general, to help the rest of us make sense or better understand what it means if a particular policy suggests this or a particular political activist suggests that.
sure, sure. It just does not only impact the nation, it impacts globally on that scale. I'd love to tap in a bit more on the impact factor. I know you touch upon the impact factor in this field, but how do you see these programs, either being your own program, the environmental change, global environmental change, or any other environmental studies program, affecting the society both at a national and a global level? I know you touch upon the, but I'd like to know more. And what's the real world impact of studying this subject on a nation wide and a global wide? It'd be good if we can go into the details and examples on that.
Okay. Well, I suppose an important impact is becoming comfortable of thinking about and talking about things at a systems level. And that's really what you're talking about when you talk about, well, this part is affected by this part and this part didn't affect something else. Um, it, our program is focused and framed around climate change, but of course it deals with other aspects. But climate change in particular is a global problem, and it's not something that we can run away from. As I said, the UK is performing very well, but partially that is due to response to shifting production to other parts of the world. And we need to have evidence for what that means, and be able to speak to this. Just an example of one of the many challenges. I think one of the main impacts is is having a situation where folks are more comfortable moving between different roles and relying on arrays of different expertise to try to address these problems. We use the term siloed thinking in academia for situations where people stick within individual perspectives. And it's becoming increasingly more important in academia to consider yourself someone that doesn't have a very strict boundary around the areas you're interested in. That's one of the key aspects of my my work and my career so far. I've been very lucky to work with a wide range of people with very different skill sets and perspectives. And I think we really need to try to normalize that a little bit more and have graduates that, of course, yes, have adhere to certain competencies, but also are comfortable with bringing what they've learned into new perspectives and applying some of this systems thinking in different places, because the systems you interact with or the systems that the problems you're trying to solve are interacting with will be different depending on where you work. But we're in a more globalized world. That's not going to change. That genie is staying far away from that bottle. Um, so the ability to bring this interdisciplinarity to different disciplines in different settings, in different contexts, I think is going to be increasingly important for the workforce, but also just, again, helping wider society in general appreciate how complex these things actually are.
Wonderful. Looking ahead, the field is, of course, constantly evolving as any other field. And of course, environmental is one of the evolving one that's quickly evolving and that we've seen throughout these recent years. What do you see as the next big development in such programs later on? And are there any, let's say, breakthroughs or innovations on the horizon that really excites
Sure.
you that would be great to see?
I guess it's obligatory to say AI. It seems to be something that overshadows an awful lot of what we do. It's one of the areas that we are interested in trying to identify how AI can be used to try to leverage the amount of or the huge amount of increasing information and data that's available and helping individuals make use of that. I see that we are going to have to try to present or there's increasing demand for organizations to have a better understanding of their own individual impact and how that can help. And one of the main fundamental activities within this program is trying to instill and convey the basic skills of how you can better understand and measure and quantify the environmental impact of a suite of activities or an organization or the demands of an individual. And so I see those two kind of coming together a little bit in terms of, okay, well, we have certain methods and we have certain tools to come up with numbers, but we also have an increasingly complex set of systems to try to integrate those things together. And I think we need to have a better understanding collectively within the environmental sciences of how the existing tools that we have worked with and have developed are going to either affect or be affected by this or or misused by this wonderful new service and system and series of tools that I think we all still are getting our heads around.
Yeah, yeah. I agree. AI right now, I think it should be integrated in every single field right now, and it's a big impact. It'd be exciting to see how that will be planned out. Now, I want to touch a bit closer here for students and professionals really considering a degree in this area.
Mm.
How does a program such as your program, the Global Environmental Change, prepare them for diverse career paths?
Sure.
And what kind of job opportunities can graduates expect? I think this is one
Okay.
of the top controversial questions that a lot of either being students at high
Right.
school,
Mhm.
parents that are worried about their kids, or even a postgraduate, a person that's currently taking a career off into environment. We get to touch up on that if you can.
Sure. Okay. Well, now, if I was involved in an engineering course, or if I was involved in a industrial manufacturing course, I'd probably have a much more bounded and clearly defined answer to you. But I'm afraid um, it's not really a single career track. Being an interdisciplinary, I've worked in academia for quite a while, but as I said, I don't consider myself focusing on any one area. And this program is designed to equip students with both quantitative and qualitative skills, both of which will have relevance within the wider workplace. One of the things that we try to do very, very quickly is get students comfortable talking about their ideas, standing up, presenting to the class, and more importantly, getting feedback from the class themselves. One of the things we really try to instill in students is that peer feedback and peer assessment is really essential. And one of the things that I feel strongly as an educator is the value of training folks to ask good questions, like you've been doing. When we start off, students within this, students often try to, oh, I'm going to try to, try to get a gotcha. I'm going to try to, but that's not necessarily what we're looking for. We're trying to train people that are confident in exploring and asking thoughtful questions to help them understand what a particular topic is about, and helping steer students to be able to, well, respond to those thoughtful questions. Now, that's just kind of in general. More specifically, we, as I said, we try to effectively have a choice whereby, okay, if students want to, the course is intended as a focus on environmental science, but the expectation is that students will choose as their optional subjects, if they wish, subjects that are more based around socioeconomics or other areas as a counterbalance to the more technical, quantitative core elements. Now, the extent to which a student does that is up to them. If you want to be absolutely focusing on environmental science for most of your the degree, that's fine. So in terms of the career pathways, well, that's really up to the student based on what they have interest in and what their competencies are. So students leaving this program would have the capacity to look at jobs either in a wide array of areas, from consultancy, government research, technical laboratory elements, all from the perspective of someone who is not just a specialist in that area. So I'm afraid it's a bit of a cop out. The answer to your question kind of depends on what the students themselves bring to the table, what they feel like they are best placed to contribute, and what they want to learn. And that's that's very, very tricky. Trying to find this Venn diagram between what you're good at, what you like, and what you'd like to learn more of is not, it's not an easy thing. And I do feel for students across all programs when they're faced with this, because many of our students will come from situations where they've had limited choice in their studies so far. And one of the first things we do is we sit down, okay, well, these are your options, and this does this, this does this, this does that. And you've got to pick which ones are interesting to you. And that's quite challenging. But by getting students engaged with that early, it helps them try to appreciate that, look, you have a lot of ownership over your experience, and there is there's no expectation that you go any one particular way. And it helps students prepare for the level of independence that we'd expect for a postgraduate program.
Lovely. It is fascinating to learn that environmental sciences does not mean that they're going to be just a scientist, or they have a diverse career path, which reassures them that it's not the end of the world if they don't
Absolutely.
program. So as as we start to wrap up, I'm sure there are listeners who are considering this degree but might feel unsure about their choices in that factor, because there are many students
Sure.
struggle figuring out what their career path, what are you going to study, and how will that impact their career, and so forth. What advice would you offer prospective students about selecting a degree in a university? Are there
Okay.
go ahead.
Well, I mean, the boring advice is just, first of all, make sure you read the perspective of any program very clearly, and it should give an outline of what you're doing in first semester, second, third, etc. And my advice would be to try to think about, okay, well, what would you like to be ideally? Where would you like to be at the end of your program? Is there a particular set of skills that you want to try to develop, or is there a particular topic that you feel strongly that I want to be involved with and gain competency in? And if you're armed with that, you can then look at the prospectus and try to see, okay, well, you know, is there something here that I feel that aligns with both my interests and my skills? And I would advise all students that are looking for postgraduate opportunities, just in general, when in doubt, ask. Um, trying to understand, you know, trying to understand exactly what you're going to do over the course of 2 years or more is going to be very difficult from a single website. So it's
True.
always a good idea to feel comfortable with reaching out. Most programs, including our own, including this one, you can contact the person by email or some office. And I suppose the most important question you can ask is, okay, I see here that you are studying these particular topics. I'm interested in them. So the most important questions are, what do I need to prepare me to start? If I don't have X, Y, Z, is that the end of the world? What kind of things will I do during the program, during this particular, how will I be assessed is also very important. A lot of our students um, at the start, I mean, I'm always impressed by the extent to which students arrive and they're told they have to do a presentation. And it's like, oh my God, this is it. I'm sorry. No, no way. And by the end, they are able to give wonderfully concise, fluent, and interesting presentations. Um, and for me, that's a really important skill set. One of the things, very crucially, and this program is a key example, is that if students are used to a situation of relying significantly on exams, well, then maybe you might need to try to ask for some extra support in a situation where most of the assessments are program or sorry project or more open ended. As in the case with this program, we have very few exams. It's really most of the assessments, the students have a huge amount of freedom as to how they interpret what is asked of them. So understanding, okay, what level of additional support is available is also very important. So our university will have dedicated library sessions for students that are might require a little bit of extra support in different aspects, including numeracy, including presentation skills, including research skills, including students that might have a situation where they're have, let's say, their experience might have been, now we are post COVID, so this is thankfully becoming less of an issue. Maybe they have done an awful lot online and it's returning to the classroom uh, and being talked at by weird Irish lads with beards. It's something they might not have expected. That's completely part of the course as well. So I would say I would advise all students look at the prospectus, try to figure out what is being asked of you. If that's not clear, or if you have any questions, ask and ask for the things you think that you are going to need help with. What specific support will be available in these areas?
Amazing. I like the idea that students can be able to have that opportunity to actually go up and before even applying to go and ask.
Mm,
That's one of the things I think that are missed among students, that they have that opportunity and they can do so and they should do so. I love that. I know you touched upon specific skills
mhm.
that students, but generally, if you can be able to touch a bit on what specific, if there are specific skills or qualities they should develop for them to succeed in such a field.
Okay, well, I'm going to focus a little bit on the module I lead, just an example. And so the module I lead, students do try to work out the environmental impact of a particular activity that they themselves select. So you will have a certain skill sets, a certain procedures, certain calculation mechanisms and equations you can use, but it's up to you to pick something and try to find out about it in such a way that you can answer these questions. That also applies to one of our modules that looks at corporate social responsibility and ESGs, whereby we're asking students to play the role of almost like an investigator to try to look at, okay, what does a particular company say it is doing, and is that backed up by the folks that are also looking at this topic or in this region? So one of the really important skills is students feeling confident and capable of almost acting like a detective, trying to find out things themselves, try to understand and look for information on the area you're interested in. And there's no rules and there's no real set rule as how to go about it. It's up to you to try to use your initiative and say, okay, well, this is what I need to look at. Where might I find this information? What could I use to help indicate what a particular answer might be? And I find that really fun. And a lot of my students find it intimidating at the start because they want to be, okay, I want give me an equation, and I'll put the answer in the equation, I'll put the values in the equation, I'll get the answer out. But to be told, well, actually, if you're looking at this particular sector, why don't you read up and try to find out how big are the trucks that are used in the mango sector in this country, okay? And try to, have fun doing it.
I love that. Encourage them to have the curiosity built in
Absolutely.
is a fundamental skill. I love that. Dr. Welsh, thank you so much for your time and for sharing such valuable insights. It's been a pleasure learning more about your work and the impact your program Global Environmental Change has and is. For those of you tuning in, we hope the conversation has been both informative and inspiring. Until next time.